first thing I want to say is to the two of you, thank you very much for kind of keeping all of this organized and kind of taking care of the website and so forth and so on. So it's been very nice, and we ate very well. I am a father of 7, and I am not Catholic. I have 8.5 grandchildren. I've been to Israel and the West Bank 11 times. I've been next to Gaza, but I haven't been in Gaza. And I have given probably 250 presentations on this subject since 2000.
Welcome, everyone. Before starting, too, I just want to say thank you to those who have helped organize this event, including Hopkins HREI Initiative and Gethsemane Lutheran. YourJewish, of course, has been involved. So thank you very much for anyone who's had any contribution to making this happen tonight. I'm Emma Rifai. I'm a religious studies scholar and educator. And I am the partner to a Palestinian-American and a mother to a little Palestinian-American toddler. So thank you all for having us, and we will let Jill give us a sense of what tonight holds. So go ahead, Jill.
All right, thanks everyone. And also thank you to people who are joining us online. We're glad you're here. So I am going to just give an overview of how we're going to spend our time this evening before we begin. We are going to start with a few opening reflections that both Moneer and I are going to share, and he's also going to share just a little, bring us up to speed on where we have been since October 7th. Different from the first event we did, this is not a historical overview of the Arab-Israeli conflict. That's not our goal this evening. Our goal is to talk about where we are 15 months later, almost 16 months later. So we're going to start with those opening reflections. After that, Steve and Emma are going to lead us in some prepared questions. They are going to moderate a discussion with some prepared questions. And then after that, we are going to invite all of you to also share any questions that you have for us. In order to facilitate that, we are going to invite you to submit questions through this app called Slido. It'll be a way for us to help to get a sense of what you all are thinking, and Emma and Steve are going to review those partway through the evening. So go ahead, and I know we'll be all looking at your screens. We know you're not texting and playing games. You can scan the QR code if you have a question at any point throughout the first half of our program. And go ahead. It'll be a brief. It does cut you off after, I think, 150 characters. So you have to keep it brief. And during that time, Moneer and I are going to talk about what's next after this event. Did I miss anything?
I think you got it.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to do this quick because so much has happened over the last 15 months or so. But just to kind of remind ourselves of what has happened, because honestly, sometimes I can't even remember all the events that happened. But we're not going to do a historical overview. This is too broad for this evening, but just a quick update on the last 15 months have had, unfortunately, a lot of things happen. Some key players, I'm sure we all know who the key players are: Hamas, Israel, or the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Iran, and marginally, but also relevant, the Houthis in Yemen. Did I miss anybody? Okay. I'm sure Syria, it's a dynamic situation in Syria. So obviously on October 7, a horrific day for the Jewish community and for the Israeli community. An attack by Hamas, a cowardly attack that resulted in the death of almost 1,200 people and a couple hundred hostages. Almost the following day, there was a response by the Israeli IDF, and almost that same day as well, Hezbollah retaliated from Lebanon. So a lot of things happened within these 2 days. October 13, we have an attack. We have a large number of Palestinians being moved from Gaza City south. And then from then on, there was a lot of events happening in quick succession. You had the ground offensive that began in Gaza. You had the Iranian embassy compound in Damascus was hit, and as a result, Iran retaliated a couple weeks later. Then you had an explosion in Iran that was on July 31st of 2024. You had an explosion that took out a Hamas leader, and then we've heard about the pagers that exploded in Lebanon as a part of an attack on Hezbollah militants mostly. And then tension escalated between Iran and Israel, and they launched a massive missile attack. I believe that was on October 1st. And that same day, I believe, a ground operation in Lebanon began in southern Lebanon. And October 16, Sinwar, who was the Hamas leader, was killed. And finally, on the 21st, well, not finally, but on the 21st, you had the ICC, the International Criminal Court, issue arrest warrants for some Hamas leaders and some Israeli leaders as well, including Netanyahu and Gallant. And in November 27 of last year, Hezbollah and Israel agreed to a ceasefire, and January 15 of this year, they agreed to a ceasefire in Gaza. So you're not going to be quizzed, but a lot has happened. Of course, we skipped over the many, many, many events that happened within Gaza and Israel and Lebanon and Palestine. There's a lot of things happening in the West Bank as well. As Steve mentioned, Syria is at a dynamic situation in Syria. We know that the regime in Syria was overthrown, and there's a lot of unknowns on what's happening there. There's some tension with the Houthis, a group based out of Yemen as well. I don't know if I missed any major events, if anybody would like to add anything. This is meant to just be a quick overview. We're not going to go into the details here. But I thought maybe it might be helpful for us to weigh in, maybe give some insight, some personal insight. Maybe Rabbi Jill and Steve later can offer some insight from the Jewish community here. I know, Jill, you have a lot of contacts in Israel, and you live in Israel, so you probably have more insight than the average person reading the news might. And maybe after she does that, I might give some insight into my, or I guess, although I don't represent the whole of the Palestinian community, but I might be able to give some insight and personal stories.
All right, thanks, Moneer. And as you said, it's impossible to go through every detail, but hopefully that helps to set the stage. So thanks for providing that. As I was thinking about how to share these reflections, how to even begin to answer the question, where are we, where am I, after October 7th, the feeling of being overwhelmed by that question reflects the feeling of what it has been like since October 7th. The way that I often like to describe the Jewish community is that the Jewish community, by and large, exists through this realm of unity, but not uniformity. And so, though the Jewish community, the global Jewish community, including Israel and everywhere else in the world, has by and large been unified these last 15 months, that does not mean that there is uniformity in what folks believe and what folks have experienced across the Jewish community, both in Israel and also here in the United States. So I'll talk a little bit, just very briefly, about the broader Jewish people, and especially in Israel. And then I thought I would also just share a few personal reflections, as I can really only truly speak about my own personal experience since October 7th. So first, stepping back, the Jewish community, by and large, has been in a state of loss, grief, fear, a feeling of the unknown of what lies ahead, and every emotion under the sun. Moments, of course, of joy in seeing the hostages released, the unbelievable experience of trying to hold multiple emotions all at the same time and sort of crying those tears of joy, seeing one of our family members released from captivity after nearly 500 days, and the same time tears of pain in knowing how many are not coming back and how many we've lost. And so the last 15 months has been that experience of holding multiple emotions all at the same time and trying to figure out how to navigate those personal feelings. That's on the one. That's one. And then the second piece is trying to figure out where do we go from here? How do we engage in the world around us? How do we interact with our neighbors? That's something we're going to talk about throughout this evening. Sort of that tension and that pull of wanting to sort of bring ourselves to isolate ourselves, to sort of move inward and be in safe spaces where there are other people who understand what we're going through, and we don't have to be in fear of what somebody else might say, and worried, oh, is this person going to, what is this person going to say when they find out that I'm a Zionist? And so there's that desire on the one hand to sort of retreat inward, and then there's the pull on the opposite end of the spectrum of recognizing that we're part of a broader people and part of a broader civilization, and we do live amongst our neighbors, and we care about them, and trying to figure out how to navigate those multiple identities. And then the biggest question, I think, going forward, and then I'm going to let Moneer speak a little bit because we have lots of time to get into the weeds, is really the amount of time that we're spending thinking about our Israeli loved ones, in conversation with them, and trying to be there to be as supportive as possible, whether that, whatever that looks like. And I think having sort of a part of ourselves in Israel, even if we're not physically there. And I think a lot of people in the Jewish community have now started to speak about their lives in the world as sort of pre-October 7th and post-October 7th, that oftentimes you'll hear that framework of, oh, that was October 6th world. Or often that phrase of the idea that everything is different and nothing is the same as it was before October 7th. So I'll leave it there, and I know we have a lot to get into, and I'll let Moneer share a few reflections.
Thank you for sharing that. First, I want to say thank you for everybody who's here. I know this is a heavy topic, and I know this is not the most, or this is probably one of the most controversial and polarized issues, so I appreciate you being here. And I guess I just want to remember that most of us here are colleagues, friends, neighbors. So if you take one thing away today, is just kind of keep that in mind, that we're colleagues and neighbors. If you hear something you don't like, just hopefully we will model ways we can disagree but still respect each other. And I guess if you can take one thing away, is maybe you can take that sense of empathy and moderation and help us spread that to others who might be more on the extreme ends of things. So here we are 15 months later, and we have a ceasefire. It's happy news, but I'm optimistic, but I guess I would say my optimism is optimistic with extreme caution. It's a fragile ceasefire, and sometimes we tend to think, oh, okay, ceasefire, so things are good, right? But no, sadly, in Gaza now, the bombs stopped dropping, yes, but things are in dire conditions. You have, after 15 months of conflict, roughly 90% of Gaza is destroyed. Roughly 47,000 people, and I know some numbers are disputed, but it's hard to tell with exact certainty, but over 47,000 people have been lost. Over 110,000 people are injured. You have a population on the brink of collapse. Not only have the infrastructure damage and the death and injuries, but you have a population on the brink of famine. You have lack of access to basic needs, to water, to medical supplies. You have risk of infectious diseases and famine, as I mentioned. Not to mention extreme trauma. So when I think about my personal reflections, to be honest, it's kind of hard for me to think through that sometimes. So hopefully I'll share some of my thoughts, and hopefully you'll understand kind of where I'm coming from. But on the one hand, I do feel kind of lucky and privileged that I personally I haven't lost a loved one in Gaza. I don't know any immediate family members or friends. So I feel that I have some emotional distance from the emotional trauma that is associated with what's going on there. But on the other hand, my heart is broken. It's broken for just the innocent lives lost, for the 47,000, not to mention the couple thousand Israelis who have died since. And it's kind of it's kind of odd, but sometimes when you're faced with such intense loss of life and destruction and damage, you almost kind of go numb. And I hate to say it, sometimes I open the news and I hear about another 100 people were killed, and you almost tune that out because it just becomes, it's almost your brain can't comprehend that level of tragedy. So I thought maybe I can share a couple stories that might help us connect kind of what's going on there. It could be my daughter. It could have been my daughter in that case, but that was another story that I felt spoke to me. There's obviously a lot that happened since, a lot of tragedy, a lot of, as Rabbi Jill mentioned, we can talk about some of the details. But for me, my only hope is we can humanize what's happening in that region and not think of them as just pure numbers and pure casualties. And, this is what happens in a war. I think a lot can be done to humanize those innocent lives being lost. So I'll leave it at that, but I think the question now we have is, with things being where they are now, which in my opinion, they've hit rock bottom lately, and this is a lot to say for a conflict that's been going on for so long. Where do we go from here? And I think that's kind of the question we're hoping to maybe unpack today and find ways to move forward. And I think Steve and Emma might help us answer some of those questions that revolve around finding ways that can help us move forward.
Great. Thank you both to Moneer and Jill. I'm just kicking us off with the first question. As Jill has said, we've just prepared some questions that Steve and I are moderating in an effort to demonstrate productive, generous dialogue from both sides of this sort of Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And so we just want to hear from both Jill and Moneer some reflections on some of these questions. There'll be a little bit of back and forth. And then Steve and I can certainly jump in with a few follow-up questions. And bear in mind, we are going to be monitoring what you've submitted, but that'll be in the next section tonight. So those are not being ignored. We'll get to those next. So, all right, so we're actually going to step back briefly, and we're asking Jill and Moneer here to reflect on, why did you initiate your relationship? I mean, that seems like a basic question, but just a sense of why are we here? And then why, after the initial connection, was it important for you guys to maintain your relationship over the last 15 months?
I'd love to start with sorry about that. I'd love to start with the first part because I want to give Moneer the credit, and it might be harder for him to give that to himself. But the reason that Moneer and I even met in the first place is Gethsemane Lutheran Church was interested in holding an event to talk about October 7th and what is happening in the region afterwards. This was maybe in November or so, and approached Moneer because he's part of the Gethsemane community to ask him to speak with the church community. And you can tell me if I'm getting it wrong, but I want to give you the credit, is that Moneer responded by saying that he thought it would be more appropriate and more informative and helpful to do that event in dialogue with someone from the Jewish community, and which I think is, I have so much respect for that. And because I'm involved, or was involved at the time in HREI, that's how I became connected. And so I wanted to start with that origin story for those of you who weren't with us last year, that's how we met. And I am so grateful that we have continued the relationship. I think it is as important, it's more important today even maybe than it was last year, for our communities to come together and to not isolate, but to recognize that we do live together in this world, and that the best way that we can move forward is to be in dialogue, to build relationships, and to build bridges between our communities. And so that's why I've continued after the initial relationship started.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your what you said there. And I've just going to add to what Rabbi Jill said. I've done this before. We lived in Iowa before moving to Minnesota a couple of years ago. So I've done some events, and I found that the community responded very positively and was a lot more engaged. And I found a lot more receptiveness. So I think it held both. Obviously, each one of us have their own quote unquote agenda or motive, but obviously our common motive or agenda is to find that common area and humanize each other and kind of amplify those voices of moderation. So, and I found that this was effective, and we hope we do more of these events in the future.
Just to remind you of some of the rules here, is that the four of us are fanatical moderates. Okay? That's what we are. If you're looking for entertainment, it's between Emma and I. Okay? These two are like the nicest people you've ever met. These two are. Emma and I have, I would say, a very nice relationship, an important relationship. She has opinions, I have opinions, and if there's any sparks that will ever show up on this stage, it will be between Emma and I. Okay, we have no control over what's going on. So Jill and Moneer are going to talk about what we're trying to do towards the end of this gathering. So please listen closely, because if you're curious you might find it fascinating to be involved. Next question, guys. Why are you participating in this event?
Besides that we're crazy, is that the answer?
You could say that.
Do you want to start or do you want me
Why are
to?
you participating in this?
Well, I would say it's the pay. We're making a lot of money. I'm just kidding. No. I truly believe, and I'm convicted, and I'm very convinced of this, that the only way through this, the only way through this intractable mess is through compromise, through peace, through dialogue, through understanding. I do not think violence is the answer, and I don't think there's any winners here. People talk about winning this conflict and winning that and I honestly do not think, I think if you believe that somebody can win this conflict or this war or can come out as the winner, then I think you're disillusioned. I think the only way through is through some sort of a compromise, understanding, dialogue, peace, whatever you might want to call it. We're not there yet, and we might not be there for a while, but if we can't model some of this, then we might as well just pack up and go home now. I think if we, and I truly believe that there are more people who are in that moderate, it's kind of the 80-20 rule. I think that 20% of the extremists on both ends are just the loudest, but I do think the bulk of the people, of those with connections to this conflict, want to see some kind of a peaceful resolution, some kind of an end to this. And I think their voices are being drowned out by all these loud, angry voices. So I think the hope is we can model some compromise, some civil dialogue going forward.
What are you expecting as an outcome?
I would say in the next,
That was on the sheet.
Jill, do you have any comments on that? Why are you doing this?
Yeah, I'm happy to share my, I'll share sort of two different reasons why I'm doing this. I am a peacemaker in my personality. I have always been someone who tries to build bridges in my personal life, in my work more broadly. So I also am sort of a dialectical thinker, and so I believe in my heart and soul that I can be both a proud Zionist and also care about the future of the Palestinian people, and that both of those things can be true at the same time, and I want to bring that forward. Also, in addition to that, similar to what Moneer said, I believe that the future needs to include some level of tolerance between the Israeli community and the Arab world, the Palestinian people. And I think that it is in Israel's best interest to be engaged in dialogue and to live in a tolerant neighborhood. And so I'm here for all of those different reasons, both for the personal, and also because I think it's the path, it's the only path forward.
I'm here because the two of you are fascinating. Okay. Third
Go ahead.
question.
All right. These are tricky. All right, so I'm going to pose the next question. So I'm going to state it, and then I have a request. So our next question is, what do each of you, Jill and Moneer, identify as the primary source of tension between your two communities? And what I'm asking in this question is that you give us your very human reaction to that. You are, you both are experts in some ways, but we don't expect you to have, it isn't a lecture. I think we all want to hear, what's your gut reaction to that? And then I'm asking all of us to hear their responses on a very human level. And and accept them as just two individuals from two different communities reacting to this question. So again, the question is, what do each of you identify as the primary source of tension between your two communities?
So I would say a couple things, maybe two main things that come to mind. The Palestinian community has, and by Palestinians, I'm mostly thinking of those in Gaza and the West Bank, the way they experience their life, or they have experienced their life for the last few decades, is basically living under occupation and oppression. I know some of you might not agree with this, but that's their personal experience. They don't feel they have agency. They don't feel they have access to many life's necessities, not to mention, employment and educational opportunities. But even, I think it's cliche by now, but they talk about Gaza, how Gaza was before the conflict was, it's often described as an open air prison. It's a large area of extremely highly dense area. About 2+ million people live in a tiny strip of land, and obviously that population was facing severe struggles just existing day to day. So that's kind of the most recent example. But more broadly, over the last, I don't know how many years, but 20, 30, 40 years, many Palestinians would describe their existence as that of living under occupation, and they often describe it as like there's lack of dignity in being able to just exist. Actually, one good description of that is our Twin Cities native author, Tom Friedman, in his book From Beirut to Jerusalem. He talks about like mundane interactions, and this was written back in the 80s, I believe. Mundane interactions between the IDF soldiers and just like kids in Gaza or in the West Bank, and just like daily mundane actions that kind of shows how just daily life was just a challenge for many people. Now, there's obviously many causes, many root causes, and we can talk about the role of organizations like Hamas and the PA and whatnot, but that would be the first point. The second point is many Palestinians feel that their life is not seen as equal or worthy as that of their counterpart Israelis. There's often a lot of frustration when, especially for those who live in the West, when, and it's kind of awkward to talk about because you're talking about people who are losing their life, and it should not be a competition, but there's often this feeling that their life is not as important or as significant. So you often will not hear about some incident that resulted in, and I'm talking about before this conflict, you would not hear about some incident that resulted in, let's say, 20 Palestinians dying. You will not hear about it in the West, but you will hear on headline news if something happens on the opposite side. Now, it shouldn't be that way, and I hate comparing it that way, but that perception that their life is not as worthy or is not as valuable is also a source of tension.
It's so powerful to hear you speak, because I think, first of all, it's devastating, that people have that lived experience. And what I was thinking about as you were talking was that the way that I would answer that question is really, it's quite similar in terms of how so many Israelis and the broader Jewish people feel, in the sense, and especially this is true right now, in feeling like right now the entire international community believes that Palestinians have a right to have a sovereign home in a land that has significant history for them, but the Jewish people don't have that same right, and sort of feeling like the international community has turned against the right of the Jewish people to be sovereign people in their homeland. And I think that this is a recent source of tension that I think exists amongst Israelis and the Jewish people, and feeling this sort of constant frustration of feeling like time and time again, the Jewish people and the Israeli government has tried to propose and create, two states for two people, and time again, it has been rejected, and not only rejected, but rejected to the point where Israelis do not feel safe in their homes and feel like they are constantly under attack, and nobody's talking about all the rockets that are coming, and sort of this. The reason I'm talking about this is because I think that in some ways the answers to the way that we're talking about the tensions that exist are that we're often both coming from the way that I hear it is that we're both coming from a place of feeling like everybody's trying to kill us. And
Let me try and summarize that.
please, Steve.
You got two sets of people who do not feel appreciated. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and
You got two sets of people that somehow are comparing themselves to each other, and neither of them feels appreciated.
yeah, and I guess I would maybe, I know there has been a shift in international opinion about some of the actions being committed by Israel, but I'm surprised to hear that you think there's a shift in the belief that the Jewish people need a home. I don't think anybody that we would seriously consider their opinion worthy of consideration has floated that idea of not having the Jewish people have that as their home. I think, and I think that comes up often is it's often seen as mutually exclusive. You're either Palestinians can be free, that means, and I've had interactions with people that saw a bumper sticker that says Free Palestine, and they thought, oh, this is very offensive to me. And my thought is, they're not mutually exclusive. Palestinian people can be free, and the Jewish people can be free and have a home. And we all know about the long Jewish history. This is something I empathize with, is the long Jewish history of trauma and suffering that has been, especially this trauma that's been reawakened recently. But I do still think that doesn't mean that the Palestinian people cannot live also, have also a home and be free of oppression.
Yeah, I mean, I am so appreciative to hear you say that. I think it means a lot. And there are a lot of people who aren't saying that, who have said it to my face directly. And so I think, one of the positive outcomes in my mind of this event is that people just heard you say that. And that's really important. And I know that I hope there are more people like you out who exist in the world, because the truth is that there has been a huge surge in anti-Semitism, and it is not entirely, in large part because of what is happening. And I could not count the number of people who have experienced unfortunate instances where people have expressed exactly what you said you were surprised to hear.
Can you help us understand something? Because us being Jewish, it's hard for us to put our feet in a Palestinian shoe. Our community is not monolithic. I mean, we have so many different kind of branches. What's the Palestinian community like?
I would say the Palestinian community is also not just one entity. It's I'm not going to deny there are factions.
So we have them too.
Yes, there are extremist factions, and you know, you hear them say outrageous things, but I think the average Palestinian person just wants to kind of live their life and raise their kids and kind of work and just feel dignified and feel like they can go about raising a family and worshiping and just existing in a way that they don't feel is undignified or humiliating. And there are, as you know, there are many Palestinians or Arabs that live in Israel. There are some that live in the diaspora, like myself. And so there's a wide range of views, but I would say the average Palestinian does not want to, you know, cause harm to the Jews or does not want to see maybe what some of those extremist factions state. Emma, do you have anything?
Emma, do you want to add anything to that?
I think what I'd have to jump in and say is, and I suspect to some degree in this room this may be unpopular. However, you know, I appreciate that both communities feel significantly under threat, and I don't mean to diminish that. I'm also deeply troubled by the rise of anti-Semitism. I think that's a deeply concerning trend globally. We have stories out of Australia just this past week, so you know this is not to be taken lightly. And at the same time, I feel inclined to emphasize the vast differential between loss of life here. I understand a population feeling under threat, but it is Palestinians who've lost their lives in significantly higher numbers. And I think it's truly important that we acknowledge that, yes, these things are important. And when we look at the disparities of where the numbers fall, I think it's important to acknowledge that as well. So to me, it's not just a question of who's feeling unappreciated, but who is actually losing their lives right now.
Yeah, I think I could not agree more that the loss of life in Gaza has been absolutely devastating and horrific. It is a tragedy. And I think this is, you know, we're still sort of in this like point of tension, but I think that a point of tension that exists is between the communities is often like, who is responsible for that loss of life? And I think that obviously there's not one answer to that. There are many, many, many different people who hold responsibility. And I don't want to, I'm hesitant to go down a path of blame. And at the same time, it is a point of frustration in the Jewish community that there is a constant, focus. What feels like the focus is solely on the responsibility of the Israeli government and the IDF. And sometimes it feels, at least the way that I perceive it, and many in the Jewish community perceive, that there is sometimes zero blame associated with Hamas and the way that Hamas treats its own people. And I think there's a point of tension there. And I also extend that to the broader international community and the United Nations and the Red Cross and this frustration in the Jewish community that it feels like all blame lies with Israel, when the reality is that Hamas is responsible for the way that they have treated their own people.
maybe we should go on to the next question because we're kind of behind.
I do think this is a moment to regroup here. We have a number of questions left, but I see that we're already almost to 8 o'clock. And so I think we might want to consider, do we want to continue with prepared questions, or should we allow the community here to submit theirs? I believe this event is meant to be done in the next half an hour, so
Can you make
what
one more question and then move to the yeah.
one more? Okay. I think in light of that, I might skip ahead and pick one. Okay. All right. Let me pose a final question. I feel honored to have the kind of final moment here. But I do think this is perhaps what we'd want to end on. So I'm going to ask both of you to consider maybe sharing with us what actions are you personally taking, so this is the last question, to work towards peace for your communities, including actions that can be taken at any scale that you'd like to address. So locally, state actions, national, international levels, and additionally, what might be some options or how might you inspire others to get involved? So from your perspective, what's the best way we can send folks forward to be engaged in this issue?
Sure. So this might sound pessimistic at first, but when you ask about peace, I don't want to be naive and say, yeah, there's going to be peace soon here. Ezra Klein, who some folks might know, he says, we are not in the solutioning phase. There's no two-state solution or one-state solution. I think it's kind of naive to talk about these things now. I believe, so this is kind of my pessimism, but the good news is I do believe there's hope in the future, but I think it's going to take time. We might be talking about a generation or two here. So I would maybe shy away from commenting on like solutions or political solutions. I personally don't think it's worth spending too much effort on that topic now. So to answer the question though, I do think there are many ways we can move things in a positive direction. I think in order to have any hope for the future, we need, as I mentioned before, we need to be able to humanize both people. You need to be able to see the Palestinian people as humans worthy of being free and having agency and having their own freedom and independence. And I'm not talking politically now. I'm talking just seeing them as, just like we acknowledge that the Jewish people need to live free of oppression and persecution. I think at the same token, we need to acknowledge that the Palestinian people need to be able to live in their homeland free of persecution and occupation. So I think for me, like the starting point, if you want to talk biblically, is just, that every human is created in the image of God. So they're equal, we're equal, that shoeless kid in Gaza is also, his life is worthy. And the Israeli politician, they're all equal lives. And I think once we kind of see all these people as the same human race, I think that's kind of one prerequisite. And I do think any actions that can maybe lead to humanizing the other and seeing the other as not just as like this other evil entity, but as, like you, Jill. I mean, we live in the same town, and we've had coffee, we've had lunch before, and I think we see each other as friends and colleagues, and I think you can see past that anger and frustration. So I think any actions we can take to spread this message of moderation and humanity, and I think that would be very effective in the long term.
I'm going to push you a little because I think we want to give some folks some action items. So I appreciate the sort of flowery reflections on community building, which I'm all in favor of. But what can we do?
Well, I am, in terms of actual, action, if anybody's interested, as you know, there's many people in need for help in Gaza. I've been in touch with families and friends of friends that have lost everything, have lost their home, are living in a tent. So we've been able to provide some donations, and you'd be surprised at how little can go so far in that part of the world. So it's obvious, financial donations help, but also engaging with, trying to talk to others. And I mean, I'm going to say the cliche answer of call your representative, but that doesn't help these days. So. But obviously, being engaged civically, be it through voting or through any action that you can find that you're able to engage with, will help, as long as you can push for that message of dialogue and peace and humanity. Any actions doing that, Fatima?
Yeah. Yes. So I agree that to that message of like, don't give up because of the state of the world, and to continue to engage civically in whatever that looks like, calling your representatives, engaging on a local level. I think that, some of the ways we can have the biggest impact is often in our local community, and we're so stuck of like, how can, we aren't going to, the two of us, like solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, tomorrow, as much as we would love to do that. But what we can do is have an impact on this local community, and that's one of the things we're trying to do. I know I've been involved with my kids are in Hopkins public schools. I've been involved with the school district, especially when it comes to different instances of anti-Semitism. There's lots of ways to get involved locally. Steve has given how many lectures? 250. There are ways to help to educate the community, and I think that every small lecture that you give, you're not the only person who can do that. Right? That everybody here can help to do their part in helping to make a difference. That's like a little bit of a plug to what we're going to talk about in just a minute, which is the class. Okay, we can start talking about it. We're doing our commercial. We are launching a group, a class, for those who are interested in engaging in relationship building, in learning around this conflict with people who are different from them. So essentially doing what the four of us have been doing, but with an expanded group of people. We are going to be using a shared text, which we all four of us agree is a good text that looks at the history of the conflict. It's called Arabs and Israelis. Do you want to? It tells the history of the conflict from different perspectives, which is a little bit of what we've been trying to do ourselves. Do you want to say anything else about it?
It tells the history from a Palestinian perspective, Israeli perspective, and an Arab perspective. And we thought it was fairly balanced.
So if you're interested in joining us, we have this link that you can scan and fill out, and hopefully we can find a way to bring our communities together and engage in dialogue. And I think we, as Moneer expressed, like we both really believe that this is a concrete step that can make a difference, and to try to, on our own scale, expand what it looks like to be in relationship with people who hold different opinions, and to still respect each other and to care about each other. And I think that's one of our goals going forward.
Do you have any questions?
All right, perfect timing.
can one be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic?
Okay. I can, yeah,
Did everyone
I
hear
can
that?
take this.
Everyone good? Okay.
So the question was, is it possible to be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic? So I think that the biggest issue with this topic is around how people define Zionism, because people define it really differently. And so the definition of Zionism is that the Jewish people have a right to pursue their own sovereignty in their homeland. And when people express that the Jewish people don't have that right, then yes, that's anti-Semitic. I want to be a little more nuanced, because I think that oftentimes when people say they are anti-Zionist, they aren't actually anti-Zionist. I think a lot of times people will say they're anti-Zionist, but what they mean by that is that they have wildly negative views of the current Israeli government, and that is not anti-Semitic to be critical of choices that a government or an individual, an official makes. And so I want to clarify that, because if I just stopped at the first part, I don't think it's really capturing where most people are. And I think this goes back to what Moneer referenced earlier around the sort of the extremes and then like the 80%. And I really do believe that the vast majority of people, when they say they're anti-Zionist, when you start to really dig in around what that actually means, what that means to them, I think that most people don't really mean what they might initially express through this phrase of like free Palestine. Like the phrase free Palestine is not inherently an anti-Semitic phrase. And I think it's important for the Jewish community to acknowledge that, because I think when we call something anti-Semitic that isn't anti-Semitic, it then takes away from the things that really truly are anti-Semitic. So I think we need to be really careful. But yes, to express that the Jewish people don't have that right of sovereignty in their homeland, that is an anti-Semitic expression. That's my belief. Feel free to disagree. Maybe Steve disagrees with me.
No, I'm going to take a page from Emma.
Okay.
You're so flowery. Okay? If you believe Israel does not have a right to exist as a Jewish state, you're anti-Semitic.
That's what I said.
As far as Zion,
And then I said a lot of other things too. Yeah, flowery. Yes, I did.
Moneer, and as you answer, I'm just going to add on, we have another question that's somewhat similar, so if you might want to think in tandem, is the same sort of question that Jill kind of responded to. Is it possible to be critical of the Israeli state and not be anti-Semitic?
okay. So Zionism obviously is a loaded term for some folks, and maybe I can shed some light on how Palestinians experience Zionism. Correct, it is the notion that the Jewish people deserve to have their homeland and live free of oppression and persecution. But the way the Palestinians experience it is that, but at the expense of the Palestinian right to live in their homeland. So this kind of takes us back to the history of the conflict, and we're not going to go into the details, but the way Palestinians experience Zionism is it is at their expense. So in that regard, Zionism is seen as this movement to dispossess Palestinians of their historic homes, of their, and I can speak personally about my family. My family lived in northern Palestine, and in 1948, they basically essentially they were forced out of their homeland, their village, and that's how my family ended up in Lebanon, where I grew up. So there's a personal experience, we can talk about Zionism in terms of like the philosophy of Zionism, but then there's the personal lived experience of Palestinians who have suffered and still suffer to, till today as a consequence of maybe the Zionist, agenda or movement or policy. But I do agree that anti-Semitism is on the rise. It's something that is concerning, and I do agree that not being careful with using the term anti-Semitism can undermine anti-Semitism because it's a real thing. And I know last time you shared some experiences, Jill, about your kids going to be in teased in school and and that's heartbreaking. Her 12-year-old should not be harassed at school because he's Jewish, or I don't know if it was your daughter or your son, but that's not okay. At the same time, I think there's a big distinction between being critical of the actions of Israel now, a government that is very far right, to be honest, and many Israelis are concerned with the way the direction that government is going. And I think if you love your government, if you love your country, I think it's okay to, I think we should be critical of our government and what's happening. And, I don't think that's unpatriotic. And I think it's not unpatriotic for Israelis to criticize their government. And it's not anti-Semitic to be critical of what's happening in Israel now.
So to follow up on that, go ahead, Steve.
Quick commercial. I interpreted your comments as 1948 was a big year. If you attend the class, you will learn a lot about 1948. So I just want you to know that's a common perception, is that this whole issue that we're dealing with today is based in 1948.
All right, so taking another question, and Jill, I suspect this one's probably best sent your way first. But we've got folks asking here what sorts of political opposition exist in Israel. So some sense of, what are the varied perspectives of Israeli citizens during the past 15 months?
Yeah, there's so much to say here, so I'll try to keep it succinct. Israel is a democracy, and so the Israeli citizens are free to express their opinions, and Israelis are known to do that. They are very patriotic in their dissent, and I think that that's a very good thing. So over the last 15 months, what has that looked like? It has looked like a lot of very, very concerned citizens who have tried to express their concerns to their leaders, to their government. The biggest issue within Israel has been around the release of the hostages and I would say the priority of the concerns in fighting the war that many Israeli citizens, I would say the majority, if you look just at this most recent ceasefire deal and the hostage release, the vast majority of Israelis are supportive of the deal. Even those who are religious Zionists on sort of the right, other than the most extreme. And so if you follow sort of Israeli politics, you may know that the most extreme members of the Knesset were opposed to the hostage deal and the ceasefire and wanted, and the vast majority of the Israeli public was highly critical of that. And so I think that this speaks, and I'm not sure if this was exactly addressing the question, but I think that this speaks to the power of democracy. And it goes back to my comment earlier about, not just giving up or giving in because you don't agree with the way your own government is acting. And Moneer made that comment about the United States as well, that we shouldn't just throw up our arms and say, oh, we don't like our leaders. No, we should be protesting and speaking up and putting pressure. And I think that was one of the really, I'll just share a really short anecdote that I've been following, the return of the recent hostages. And a few of them have commented how when they were in Gaza, they could hear over the radio the protests in Israel, and that was for their release. And they talked about how they could hear their parents, how they could hear their people, in the streets pressuring Netanyahu to free them, and that was the thing that gave them hope. And so I just share that anecdote because it speaks to the power of civic engagement.
Thanks, Jill. That's great. We have one question. I'm thinking we should only do one or two more, but we have one that was directed to Moneer that's a clarifying question. So I'm going to allow him to do that, but I'm also going to introduce it here momentarily. So we have someone asking about Moneer's statement that no one is saying that Moneer's claim that no one is saying that the Jewish people shouldn't have a homeland. And I just want to say from my perspective, sitting next to him, he didn't actually say that. He said there's no one whose opinions we respect internationally who are making that claim. But I'm going to let him speak to it. So what would you say to Hamas's manifesto?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, and I've mentioned this many times, I cannot condemn Hamas and their ideology enough and their actions. Now, many people believe the Palestinians, if we agree that the Palestinians have lived under some form of occupation, many people might say, even international law would say, they're entitled to resist in some way or another. I might disagree with the methods, but I think Hamas as an ideology, and not just Hamas, but some of the extremist groups, I've looked at their manifesto. I just vehemently reject it. And I think most Palestinians would reject that. Now, I do have to admit that there is a lot of anger and frustration, and sometimes when you're so disempowered, when you're so when you have just when you have nothing, sometimes an entity like Hamas, and this is not just to Israel, Palestine, it happens in many other countries in conflicts. Sometimes that most extremist organization comes in and it gives you a sense of empowerment, a sense of agency. So they have been vocal in their anti-Semitic and anti-Israeli opinions, and they've talked about the destruction of the Jews and destruction of Israel, and I reject it, as many Palestinians do. And
Okay.
yes.
Do you want to finish? Because Emma and I came up with the original question.
Yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say. And what I said is there are people that make these extreme statements, but those are not, entities or groups that anybody would respect or take them seriously.
Okay. Emma and I would like to know, and we think the audience will too. Are either of you getting any crap from your communities for the positions you take? Because you're both flower children. So it's a question of what is your community saying to you about the positions that you're taking?
If I may start, yeah, I have, and I think you have too, Jill, but I'll let you speak to that. But listen, people are angry and frustrated, and we're not being angry here. So often at these events, and I've had the most pushback was from my own community is, you're too soft, you're too, and that's okay. That happens, and I think there's a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, which I understand, and I think there's a lot of people want to see a show, want to see like you just gotta go after someone, and And that's not my approach, but yes, I have received pushback, but I do think that, going back to my earlier point, I'm convinced that this is effective, and I think there's a place for anger and frustration, and I do respect people who are angry, and I think they're entitled to their emotions and entitled to expressing that frustration, but I don't think that is gonna be as effective long-term.
And this will be short because similarly in the Jewish community, same way you expressed it, when people are experiencing trauma and loss, it can be really difficult to put yourself in a position where you are doing sort of outreach or, looking outside and saying, oh, hey, let's come together. And I would say, yes, absolutely, that exists as well in the Jewish community, that I think because of the loss and the pain and the trauma, there are a lot of people in the Jewish community who aren't ready for dialogue and who are really retreating inward because that's the only thing that feels safe for them at this moment. And similarly, I respect that and I understand it. And so, yeah, there have been people who have been critical of this type of outreach effort. And there are more people who have been supportive of it.
I personally have learned a lot from watching the two of you. I don't know if I could do it, but I have learned a lot from watching the two of you.
Yeah, thank you both. I think we're probably going to offer you each a moment just to offer any concluding thoughts and wrap it up here. That said, Moneer, I might just mention there is one final question for folks asking if there are any nonprofits that you trust that are sending aid to Gaza. So that might be something you want to address in your final comments. But anyway, each of you a moment or two, and then we'll wrap up tonight.
Again, get your thoughts together. Deep breath.
Well, I'll start. I'll start with gratitude. Gratitude for all of you for being here. You could be anywhere else on this Sunday evening, so thank you for giving the time to this really difficult but important conversation. And thank you to everyone who is involved in helping out. In the back with the tech. We appreciate you, Gethsemane volunteers and Pastor Amy, and Emma and Steve, and of course, Moneer. So I just want to start with gratitude. And then second, really, I just want to emphasize my hope that this will lead to increased understanding, tolerance, acceptance, and hopefully relationship building in the future. I am at heart an optimistic person. One of my favorite quotes is from Golda Meir, who said that the Jewish people don't have the luxury to be pessimists. And I internalize that. And so I hope that this is a continuation of something that will lead to, a greater sense of support, relationship building, and tolerance, both locally and who knows, maybe beyond as well. So thank you, everyone.
Likewise, I'm grateful for you being here, and I'm grateful for everybody who helped with this event. I would like to kind of talk about, I know there's a question about what's happening and action we can take. I just want to emphasize that the fact that there's a ceasefire, that doesn't mean things are back to normal, whatever that means. I do think we need to be more vigilant and more proactive, and I think there is a lot that can be done. I think if you're interested in helping, there's many organizations. I'd love to talk to you. I have a little website called PALS for Peace, PALS for Peace.org, where I have links to GoFundMe campaigns that we have set up for families in Gaza. There's a family we just donated, just from people like you, some money, and they were able to resettle from the camp that they were in, and they have a toddler who's like I think a year and a half, and they sent us a picture of this toddler, and they seem to be back at home. Their home is obviously destroyed, but they're trying to get their life back together. So there's many stories like that. And as far as more other closing statements, I'm grateful you're here. I'd be happy to continue talking and continue engaging. And I'm grateful for Jill and for the this book. And I would just like to express to our Jewish friends and neighbors that we understand how difficult things are for the Jewish community, and we want to be partners. But I also want to emphasize that we need to, as a community too, we need to emphasize the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and Palestine. And again, just remember, this is not mutually exclusive. You can be pro-Palestinian and pro-Jewish, I think. You can have your heart be open for both people. It's not mutually exclusive. And I just hope that folks can remember that it's not one or the other. And again, thank you. Thank you for being here.
All right, thank you, everyone. I imagine both Jill and Moneer will stick around for a few minutes, so please do come up if you'd like to speak to them individually. And yes, thank you all, and thank you again to those who participated in putting together this event. Again, it was HREI, Gethsemane, and YourJewish. So thank you to those sponsors.